inside the Trump-Putin Alaska summit. A good place to begin this story is with the picture you were not supposed to see. Point two grinning men with gun of camera outside Anchorage in Alaska, both of them, believing that they could bring to an end, on their own terms, a war. One of them is a commercializer of peace as an individual brand. The other is selling the world on patience, pressure, and time. And there was another battleground between the one and the other, and it did not take a single minute. The Alaska summit of the U.S. President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin offered immediate ceasefire. It provided something different altogether, though, a reframing of the endgame on terms favorable to Moscow and its deadline and leverage. The meeting was held closed-door, lasting about 3 hours, and the leaders made an appearance in the press where they both claimed progress, but nothing was promised in terms of results. What did possibly occur? What reports concur on is that there was no ceasefire. Instead, the language changed to a comprehensive peace deal. First, a sequencing that reflects the order Russia prefers to follow and which marginalizes the humanitarian compulsions of halting the shooting before all other issues are addressed. Even the words of Trump after the meeting were as follows: "Russia is pretty huge, and they are not," indicated a turn toward the mass audience to move away from his previous insistence on a ceasefire. Flipping the script a moment, the switch of protocol ceasefire then talks, then maybe a ceasefire switches leverage. Ceasefire halts the movement and crystallizes territories. This foregoes battlefield pressure, which remains an advantage to the side advancing. That is why Moscow has persistently asserted that it is only the package deal of a complete settlement that is worth talking about, and why Western diplomats have worked overtime on cessation of guns first. It was in Alaska where the White House discourse got a little bit closer to the Russian line of reasoning, although Washington did not agree to grant sanctions relief or accept written claims of territory. Within the room, the tone was out of the ordinary light. Menus are curated, gifts symbolic, the vibe purposefully loose, classic summit stagecraft to bring the defenses down and to indicate personal connection. It is all no small thing. Atmospherics makes a difference. Where one leader flourishes on personal deals and the other on playing the strategic time game. The substance just would not land, though. No text signed, no timelines, no ground monitors, no ceasefire. Just a vow to continue chatting and an instruction that would give the inference of moving expeditiously without the static of particulars. The territorial issue, territory, to be more precise, Donetsk region, was the main stumbling block. Putin, say reports, insisted on still more land than Kyiv could admit to actually or morally. Trump previewed as an "oh closer," telling reporters that Ukraine needs to agree to it, but they may say no. It is not just talk. It is a push to close a deal when the terms are not in balance, and that push is in the public arena. The issue is that Ukraine constitution explicitly limits territoriality concessions, and any freeze that formally regulates new demarcations threatens to entrench possible instability later. What the world is not being told with enough clarity is how the triangle actually functions. Washington may offer to talk to Moscow all day long, but without Kyiv there in the room, nothing takes root. That is why, rightly following up Alaska, Trump scheduled a meeting with President Zelensky in Washington, supported by the new Euro posture to develop NATO-like assurances not under full NATO membership. European leaders indicated that they are willing to put long-term security guarantees on paper, so any agreement is not similar to a shaky ceasefire. That is, there must be peace, but it must be enforceable, and enforced that means poised deterrence against another invasion. There is also the optics game. At one point, Putin appeared to be annoyed when reporters threw questions at him when the choreography perhaps went wrong. Seeing that was important to a leader that gets off on control. However, the greater optical served the Kremlin. To be pictured an equal solver of problems in the U.S. soil will help to overcome the isolation and make further negotiations on Ukrainian land a new norm. In the case of Moscow, these red legitimizing appearances, which relegitimize Putin at the international scene, are not ornament. They are policy. The point of the U.S. is to be deciphered now. The administration indicated it would continue keeping sanctions on the table, no immediate relief, and talked up the potential of a three-way sit-down with Zelensky in the future. That position saves leverage, at least in notation. However, such rhetoric also sends messages about readiness to apply pressure on Kyiv to encourage compromise, e.g., the claim that Russia is quite a large power. When Washington makes the capitulation out to be the prudent thing to do, it is up to Ukraine to argue that more resistance is necessary, even as the Russian forces advance. Morale alone on battlefield and diplomatics is capable of being changed by that. This is the tactical level that most people left out. Who gains time? Freezing lines with ironclad guarantees would benefit the one which occupied territory. Delaying a ceasefire pending extension of conversation benefits the one pushing ahead. Under either of the two, unless the result is enforceable and supported by credible commitments, there is a likely risk of developing a conflict mutation instead of its resolution. Fact-checkers alerted against a whole spinning of Alaska wave tales of comprehending, breakthroughs, and historic achievements that cannot be tied to observable phenomena or decision monitors in the field. The reality test of this has been agonizingly straightforward. Are civilians safer now since the handshake than as it was earlier? Otherwise, we aren't gauging theater, we are gauging peace. So, what is next, and what should your audience start to look at? There are three telling stands. First, sequencing. How about lines at the front being moved? Should there be no ceasefire at once, on a continuance of negotiations? When the question is answered by Russia, then the leverage is turning in west direction. In the event that a proven ceasefire touches down, even provisionally, that will be a genuine turning point, since verification implies monitors, mechanisms, and disciplines. Second, certifications. European leaders are mulling a tougher system more like NATO Light, with BITE. Once Kyiv leaves the negotiating table with specific timelines, funds, and a deterrence architecture, it would be a good deal different. Moscow will push the boundaries if the guarantees are unclear. Third, sanctions and recognition. Any change in sanctions, whether targeted or otherwise, is currency. Code for territorial acceptance is any language that reflects what is going on in the ground. Note the wording. The words are also maps. Alaska was dramatic and empty because of a reason. Putin wanted to prove that he is not alone on the Russian territory. He has received it. Trump required the platform to demonstrate that he is capable of sending wars away. He achieved the photo and not the result. Ukraine required a reprieve to produce lives. It got nothing. And Europe wanted signs that Washington will install a lasting structure. It received signals, not matters. That is the score at the end of 3 hours and 1,000 headlines. However, this is the part that televised plot always fails to contain. Diplomacy does not only involve leaders, but ecosystems. It is the diplomats drafting at 3 a.m., the logisticians working out how to divide troops without creating vacuums, the economists developing sanctioned off-ramps that do not appear to encourage the next invasion, and the lawyers sorting how to achieve peace amid constitutions. Devoid of all those, summits are more of moment makers, but not mechanizers. Was it Alaska, or was it progress, or was it pageantry? Both. It brought out the actual trade-off. Territory versus dead makes, sanctions versus legitimacy, deterrence versus détente. It demonstrated what the pain points are. The status of Donetsk, sequencing of actions, and ironclad support to Kyiv prior to putting pen to paper. And it made it clear how narratives are weaponized. Comprehensive peace can be a guide to breakthrough or an excuse to entrench acquisitions. When President Zelensky drives to the capital of the United States called Washington, the cameras will say everything is on course. Listen not merely to applause lines.
Hear and listen to sequencing. Ceasefire first or talks first. Listen. Mechanisms, monitors, timetables, triggers. Hear what guarantees, who will pay, who will deploy, who will enforce, and hear the small terms by which they remap the world. Status, autonomy, recognition, reality. Alaska was not an end. This was an ordeal. Putin tried to see whether the U.S. would move to comprehensive deal of ceasefire first, and he received a hint that it might.
Trump tried his hand at putting the pressure of personal diplomacy. He had headlines, not paper handshakes. Ukraine will see whether the West will follow through and not merely support, and Europe will find out whether it can convert utterances into organizations before the killing field calls it to account. When President Zelensky drives to the capital of the United States called Washington, the cameras will say everything is on course. Listen not merely to applause lines. Hear and listen to sequencing, ceasefire first or talks first. Listen, mechanisms, monitors, timetables, triggers. Hear what guarantees, who will pay, who will deploy, who will enforce. And here are the small terms by which they remap the world: status, autonomy, recognition, reality.